Good morning. I'm Susan Shillinglaw, and I'm the director of the National Steinbeck Center in Salinas, California. And we're here today to talk about the National Steinbeck Center and its place in the community, in the region, in the nation, and in the world, and why it's such an important resource in our town. I first want to read the mission of the center in its current form. The mission is to explore John Steinbeck's legacy and contemporary relevance through education, exhibits, programs, and collaborative projects. So I want to start with that education piece because part of that and the importance of that is the archives at the National Steinbeck Center. And today I want to introduce Lisa Josephs, who is the National Steinbeck Center archivist. So Lisa, welcome.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here and to talk about the center's great wealth of material. Mm-hmm. So I want you to first say, what would someone coming to Salinas and to the National Steinbeck Center, what might they appreciate most about the archives, and what might you show them?
My favorite thing, I have a few favorites to show people because they are things that really represent Steinbeck's personal life and humanize him in a way that might not happen just through reading a text. So I like showing his personal effects that were acquired through a New York auction. These are items like his pipe, his glasses, a pencil that I let people hold so that they can really feel something related to Steinbeck. And the other nice thing is that the pipes still smell like tobacco after all of these years, so it really brings a sensory experience to Steinbeck's, to the fact that Steinbeck was a real living person. I mean, he was, with his passing in 1968, it's kind of hard for people to really imagine him anymore as a living, breathing person, and this really humanizes him in a way that people really seem to love. People get very excited when I show these things.
Nice. And the National Steinbeck Center also owns a chair that he had, so you can...
A beautiful black leather chair, actually reclines a little bit. That's another interesting item that people like to see, because again, it's a site where, it's a place where Steinbeck would have sat and pondered and thought and written and done everything that he's so famous for. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And these items are available for people to see in what way?
Well, there's multiple ways. I'm first mostly work with researchers who want to make a specific trip. They come from all over to see specific items, usually relating to their research or their project. And so they want to, a lot of them are looking for biographical information, period pieces about Steinbeck's works. So we have a few copies of Life magazine from the 30s and 40s in which Steinbeck is mentioned. They appreciate looking at those. And then also taking a look at our collection of interview tapes. Mm-hmm. So Pauline Pearson took interviews with over 130 people who knew Steinbeck at all points of his life, and got their impressions of him, Monterey and Salinas at the time that he was writing, all sorts of local history. So those are also an excellent resource for people to look at.
Good. Yeah, good.
I also, people who just simply request to see something, if I have time, if I'm not taken up with another project, I'm happy to indulge, and I've shown people just things from the archive. Just, when they ask, when they had a request, and so I show them a few things. And then the other thing I've done on a number of occasions is archive days for the festival, for our free week, and other special occasions. I'll pull things out and have a full display, usually themed to what we're working on. So for the big read, we're reading a collection of Mexican short fiction. It was a whole display dealing with items relating to Steinbeck's Mexican stories.
Good. Yeah, we, of course, have the Steinbeck Festival coming up the first weekend of May 5th, 6th, and 7th. May 5th, the festival will be held at Hopkins Marine Station, at Ricketts Lab, and at the Clement Hotel, and May 6th and 7th at the National Steinbeck Center in Salinas. And as part of that, as Lisa said, we will be having archive tours, which means that Lisa brings out some of these wonderful items and shows to people, as well as perhaps listening to a little piece of the tape and seeing the reading room. One thing that's going to happen at the festival, which is, I think, exciting for us, is that we're going to have a fundraiser for Carol Robles, who died in the fall, and name a reading room after Carol. We have many of her books that she used in researching the region, both historical and Steinbeck texts, and we're going to put those in that room. So I think a third part of this, inviting people to use the archives, is to have more students use the archives, have them open for people who come to the center, that they can see things that are in the archives so that they're not closed but available to people. Isn't that correct?
Right,
Something we're working.
in working with our education coordinator and as a long-term project, I have thought that it would be great to have students come in. I had 2 students come in for a Steinbeck project. They really weren't interested in looking at the archives so much as talking with someone who knew a more than them about Steinbeck, and I was happy to fulfill that role for them. But yeah, I do want to be able to show students archival items and get them used to the idea that archives are not just for people writing dissertations, that anyone with a question can use a resource. The archives are a different resource than, Wikipedia or the local public library, but that doesn't mean it isn't a resource that they can't use. It is for everyone to use who has a question. So with Pete Barraza's Steinbeck Institute coming from Southern California, I was able to show them a few items and just get them thinking about how to use an archive, how to use the information. So it wasn't that they were doing research to answer specifically a specific question they had, but to look at items critically and with an open mind in order to be able to understand how to get information out of these items.
Good. And Pete Barraza is a high school teacher at Santa Monica High School in Southern California who's been bringing students from Southern California to Salinas on a Steinbeck tour, up to 200 students. He's now decreased it and made it a club, really, at Santa Monica High School, a Steinbeck club, and so they're doing more archival research. They're going to do some kind of a journal, so that's very exciting, and they will be resourcing some things from the archives. So archive sounds kind of intimidating sometimes, like it's just closed to everyone else, but it's really not. And we want to make that learning is fun, that history is fun, that looking into some archival material. I just this weekend was in Port Townsend where someone said that they would donate scrapbooks of Salinas material, newspapers, magazines from the early part of the century. It hasn't come to the Steinbeck Center yet, but that would be wonderful material also for people to look at.
Yeah, there is this idea that archives are this closed, somewhat stodgy space. And now, to be fair, that some of the items in the archive are delicate, are rare, and you have to respect their use. We can't, they are not replaceable like a book from the library, though sure librarians want their books back. And so you do have to approach it differently, but that doesn't mean that they can't be approached. A difference of approach doesn't mean that they are closed and unapproachable. So I'm also looking forward to teaching students how to approach an archive as a different kind of resource and containing different information than they'll find in other places.
Good. I mean, that's very important. Another thing I think that students particularly enjoy seeing is examples of Steinbeck's handwriting, because one likes to see exactly how a writer puts pen to paper or pencil to paper. Steinbeck did both. Can you talk a little bit about the manuscripts that we have in the collection?
The manuscripts are very interesting. We have a number of manuscripts. There's the Pearl manuscript. There is the War Journal, so Steinbeck's notebook that became the basis for Once There Was a War. We have also a large collection of items relating to his writing Sweet Thursday, when it was possibly going to be a book, possibly going to be a musical. So it's kind of the material we have for Sweet Thursday is somewhere in between. So some pieces are written into scene format, others are written in a more normal book format.
Good.
But yeah, these are very interesting. People do really appreciate seeing Steinbeck's handwriting and just looking at, again, that physical manifestation of his art, and they enjoy looking at it and understanding it. The one comment I always get was, "Wow, he wrote tiny." So
yes.
I always have to point out that yes, we have to also appreciate all of Steinbeck's typists.
Yes, he once said that the small writing was part of his discipline of writing. So the more intense his concentration was, the smaller the scrawl. So it can be very difficult to read. I want to ask all of the employees at the National Steinbeck Center a question that I think is important to their work, and that is, how do you see Steinbeck's role, or what do you see as Steinbeck's role in contemporary culture? Why is he still important, or why should people come to Salinas, come to the Steinbeck Center, read Steinbeck? What do you think his role as a writer in contemporary society is?
I personally think that Steinbeck's work captured something very true, and I think he would be very happy to hear someone call his work true. I think he captured a set of attitudes, a set of situations that, while may not be happening in the moment, the Dust Bowl is a historical fact, not a present fact, still is a kind of event and a kind of crisis, really, that people recognize because people still react the same ways, people still have the same concerns. How am I going to feed my children? How are we going to survive? These things are real and these things are still present. So it doesn't matter that the Dust Bowl is a particular time in history, a particular kind of crisis. It still resonates with people because people still are acting and reacting the same way in other problems and crises and issues in to other problems in their lives. Further, I also appreciate Steinbeck's sense of humor. I think that Steinbeck was able to look at a lot of these issues, look at some of the flaws and foibles of humans, and kind of laugh at them a little. So I always note little points. When I'm reading Steinbeck, I always see these little moments where Steinbeck kind of, in the back of my mind, has a wry smile and maybe a little bit of a smirk about a situation in describing a person, a problem, a situation, government, things like that. And so in the midst of all these problems, in the midst of all the conflict that he's writing about, I also appreciate that he has this little sense of humor, and I think that is a very important factor. And I think that again, is also something that people recognize, that even in the midst of problems, we still have a bit of a sense of humor. It may be gallows humor at that point, but the fact that he reflects that and can reach out through a sense of humor is a very important thing, because people will react to a good joke where they might not react to anything else.
That's a very good point.
A joke is a very human, very interesting and beautiful way to connect with others.
And I think a sense of humor is important when we are baffled by the world, or things maybe not going the direction we want, to kind of detached and be able to appreciate Saturday Night Live or whatever is a good, good sort of therapeutic kind of response. And Steinbeck it can be you're right, very funny. Read Travels with Charlie and you see what a funny, engaging man he was.
Or he can describe a person where their quirks are brought out in an amusing light. So
Good.
I'm reading East of Eden, and he describes Liza Hamilton as being unable to imagine heaven without cobwebs to knock down off of the
That's a great
off of the clouds. And so she is what he's bringing out is she's the kind of person who is so focused on the value of work and things to be done that the idea of a heavenly perfect rest is still just a little foreign to her. She can't quite fully embrace it. And that kind of loving and yet a little bit mocking description is how I relate to my own family. That kind of affection for someone's quirks and sometimes little strange things about them.
Very good. You know, that brings us to, I think, how we at the Steinbeck Center are sort of recognizing and lauding Steinbeck's sense of humor, and that is with our annual Comic-Con, which we sponsor in December, the Salinas Valley Comic-Con. Steinbeck loved comic books, actually, and loved Al Capp, who wrote Little Abner. And Lisa, you were very much involved in Comic-Con and organizing Comic-Con. At the National Steinbeck Center, we often wear more than one hat. And another of Lisa's hats is certainly participant in Comic-Con organization. Can you briefly talk about that, or why that's so important to us?
Well, I think it's particularly important because of what Steinbeck said in his introduction to World of Little Abner. He talks about how Cap is able to gently and carefully go over our quirks, our culture, our norms, all of these things with a gentle probing that one might do with a bug or an insect, and somehow still pull out the humor, the absurdity at some points, but do it gently and kindly. So I think that's a wonderful thing with humor, with comics, is that we can pull out those little things that we hold so dear and seem so important, and really examine them, but in a loving, gentle manner. You don't have to be cruel or and harshly critiquing in order to question these things. And I think that is a wonderful thing with comics, is that we are able to use all sorts of art forms, so visual art, humor, all sorts of things, in order to be able to pull these out. So my main work with Comic-Con was getting a lot of the vendors to come and working with a lot of the logistics of the day. So I did the map to break down Hartnell Student Center into the places that we were going to be using, and be able to make sure that the day could run smoothly.
And our Comic-Con in December at Hartnell College ran very smoothly because of Lisa, who had a microphone, or not a microphone, but a megaphone, a bullhorn, to announce various panels, etc. We had descriptions of from the Comic Museum in San Francisco, and people talking about the history of everyday objects, which was a graphic presentation of nonfiction. So it was a great event with panels, with vendors, with discussion of the comics that Steinbeck would have read, and with a focus on literacy, with the Salinas Public Libraries involved in the event. So I think that intersection between text and pictures brings a lot of young readers to the page, and I think that's part of our intent, is to encourage reading, encourage literacy in many forms, because it's changing as we know. So Lisa, you were very instrumental in doing that and getting that event organized. And she's a geek, as I am not, and so she knows more about Batman than I do.
It was a pleasure.
And I think Steinbeck would have liked it, because, as he said once, comics might be the real literature of our time. So
they very well may be.
Yeah. So I think that sense of diversity of Steinbeck's interests, as you've pointed out, with his sense of humor, with his seriousness about writing, with his interest in cultural issues and the Grapes of Wrath, etc. I think that's one of the joys of Steinbeck. And don't you think that's a reason that he's so relevant today?
Yeah, he covered so many different topics. He covered them in so many different ways that, yeah, his relevance is maintained because there's nothing he didn't touch in some way or another, or wasn't interested in some way or another. So anywhere from the cultural issues to history to law and fairness and what is justice, to science and, well, he didn't appreciate math all that much, but we'll forgive him for that. So
many of us don't appreciate math as much as we should after we finish trigonometry in high school or whatever.
Pretty much.
Yes, and the Steinbeck Festival, which is going to be held in May, as I mentioned, the theme is migrations. And do you think that's particularly apt today? Or what items do you want to take from the archives for the festival? Do you?
I certainly want to see about anything that we can have relating to the Sea of Cortez and the migrations there, and also looking at trying to bring out anything from the Grapes of Wrath that we can really show, since that's one of the main migrations and stories he wrote about.
And Lisa's already also organizing a film series for the month before about migrations, so keep on, look at our website, www.steinbeck.org. To find out more about that. Thank you, Lisa, for being here today. I appreciate you coming away from the archives. Somebody's there to meet you, I know, so thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you.